I'm honored to be able to come up here, especially in the district that I have that encompasses all three of our colleges and universities in this community, to really focus. I've been really focusing on student debt and how do we ensure that families have opportunities to actually send their kids to college like I had the opportunity to send my daughter. You know, we've introduced a bill that's garnered some wide bipartisan support to actually allow employers, you know, those who make up the chambers of commerce, allow employers to have another tool in the toolbox to help recent grads and new employees and employees who just have debt, help them pay down that student debt. It's the Employer Participation in Student Assistance Act. And what it would do for those of you who are employers, it would allow you to get a tax credit of up to $5,250 a year if you were able to set up a repayment program per employee and gave them that much money to pay down their student debt. And the benefit too to the employee is they wouldn't have any tax burden either. Because if you're an employer now and you pay for tuition reimbursement, the employee's tax liability is zero. Well, if it's that way for them going to school while they're working for you, why not actually have another tool in the toolbox to recruit them and help them manage their student debt right when they get hired? Use it as a recruiting tool, especially for some of the best and the brightest that come out of our schools right here in Bloomington-Normal. Is it going to solve the problem of student debt? No. But it's another tool that employers, I think, should be very well versed in utilizing to get the best and the brightest to come work for them. We're working together to pass that. I will tell you one last thing. I testified in front of the Ways and Means Committee about this bill. And as soon as I was done talking about how it has the potential to save $4.5 billion a year in defaults, which many are backed by the federal government, I had my good friend Keith Ellison, who's as far left as you can be, and my good friend Dave Bratt, who's as far right as you can be, both come to me from the left and from the right, literally, and say, I want to co-sponsor that bill. If I can get those two guys together on anything, it's a pretty good idea. So we're going to hopefully get it with your support and move the chamber in support of something like this. Hint, hint, wink, wink. We'll be able to pass it. So thank you again very much for having me.
Let me just say thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for the award. I don't take this award lightly. I want to thank the chamber for all their help since I've been in DC. I've just been there for 1 year. I got elected September 10th of last year, so sworn in on September 17th. It's an honor and a privilege to represent the 18th District and to share McLean County with Congressman Davis, who's been huge help to me in my time in office. And we work closely together on things related to McLean County and lots of things in our district. We also share Springfield with each other. Our staffs work closely with each other on lots of issues. I'm honored to be with all of you today to talk a little bit about what's going on in D.C., to get feedback from you on what we need to be doing differently, things related to the economy, things related to here locally that we need to work on. I'll also tell you I'm very proud. I just about 3 months ago opened an office here in Bloomington-Normal with State Senator Jason Barrickman. None of my predecessors had ever opened an office here in Bloomington-Normal, but I said if I was fortunate enough to win, I wanted to do it. It's one of the fastest growing areas of the 18th Congressional District, and so we were proud to be able to fulfill that and do that. So it's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Obviously, we have big challenges in Washington, D.C., and how do we tackle those challenges? What do we do from a public policy standpoint to fix some of the things? You know, so many of the things in our country could be fixed with a roaring economy. Not at 5% growth or 1% growth, but how do we get to 2% or 3% growth in our country? Having a robust economy, you know, an increase in jobs, the economy booming, that would help so many of our problems that we have. You know, we have a $19 trillion debt. We have a stagnant economy. There's a lot of anxiety what's going on in the economy. How do we change that mentality is a big part of what I know the chamber is very involved with and what we need to look at. And coming in brand new, you know, I'm very optimistic about Speaker Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan is, you know, I think a breath of fresh air to Congress. He's very much a policy guy, and not necessarily a political guy. And you look at the Better Way agenda. We just, Rodney and I and the rest of the House Republicans, starting in the spring, looked at 6 areas of the economy of where we can make a difference. And in some ways, I think we as Republicans have not done enough to talk about our ideas, to be the party of proposition instead of opposition. Talk about our ideas and how we can better the country. And so this Better Way agenda, which you can go online and look at, I actually have a copy of it with me today, but really it's 6 different proposals: tax reform, regulation reform, national security, but particularly on tax reform and on regulatory reform. How can we, again, get government out of the way so the private sector can flourish, create more private sector jobs, bring more growth into the economy? Actually, Bloomington-Normal's done a pretty good job with growth compared to a lot of other places in the state. You're a pretty good example to look at when I look at other areas of my district in the 18th district. And so, we can learn a few things from what you've done here. But those are 2 areas as we go into the next year. Depending on what happens in November, I think we'll keep our majority in the House. But tax reform has to be a part of it. Regulatory reform. 2 issues on regulatory reform. I've been a strong opponent of the overtime rule. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, the overtime rule affects nonprofits, it affects colleges, it affects small and medium-sized businesses. But it's an example of what unelected people in the bureaucracy of the executive branch have gotten involved with. And it's what makes people cynical of government. People have come up to me and they said, "Darren, how did you guys pass a law on this overtime?" And I said, "We didn't pass it. It's unelected people in the labor department that think they know best for people in the rest of the country and pass this overtime rule." And we sat down with the administration and tried to work with them on saying, why don't we have this as a tiered approach, a graduated approach? Instead of jumping from 23,000 up to 48,000, let's do it in a more measured approach. I had a series of roundtable meetings on this back in the spring, and to double that amount, it actually hurts the people it purports to help. And that's what I tried to tell them. This may make sense in New York City or San Francisco, but it doesn't make sense in Bloomington-Normal. And it's an example of how we're hurting the economy on the overtime rule. The other one is the fiduciary rule. It gets a little bit more nuanced, but it directly affects State Farm with the fiduciary rule. Again, legislation done by bureaucrats within the executive branch. And so our proposal in the Better Way that Paul Ryan has put out has looked at how we have regulatory reform, how we look at tax reform to help our businesses. Our corporate tax rate is about 35–36%, one of the highest in the entire world. I look at a district like mine where I have Caterpillar in my district, State Farm in my district, John Deere's right on the outskirts, and look at, it's the disincentive of companies to stay in America when you can go to Ireland at a 14% corporate tax rate. Canada's at 22%. We have to be competitive. And so tax reform, which we haven't had in this country in almost 30 years, we have to change our tax code and bring that up to date and make it more efficient, effective, and accountable to businesses and taxpayers. And so look forward to working on those issues as we move forward. So pleasure to be with you today. Look forward to your questions and dialogue here today as we talk through some of these issues. Thank you.
Well, Congressman LaHood, I'm glad that you brought up the DOL overtime regulation change, which will be taking effect in December of this year. And that was really one of the #1 things I was hoping to hear from you guys about. I think the Department of Labor is basically saying the options for business owners is to raise salary, limit workers' hours to 44 a week, or pay time and a half for all hours over 40. And I think a lot of our small business owners and a lot of our members, one of the large concerns from them would be that they make up for the demanding hours by some of the tangible and intangible benefits that being a salaried worker, comes with. And Congressman Davis, I was wondering if you could speak on that as well.
Well, I come at this because I grew up in a family that operates McDonald's franchises. My dad started out in 1959 flipping hamburgers and shucking French fries, and instead of going to better jobs like his buddies were going to, he said, I have a dream. I want to own my own one day. Well, it took until 1977, when I was 7 years old, for him to get the call. And because he had a dream, my family was able to achieve that American dream. Now imagine if while my dad was trying to achieve that American dream, to work his way up, to get that recognition that you're doing well and you get to supervise others, if his employer said, well, hang on a second, we're going to have to put you back on the hourly scale. You're going to have to clock in. Your management experience is great. We love you for it. But the government told us we have to do this now. What incentive would he have had to continue that path to achieve his dream? That's his ability to achieve that dream allowed my family to achieve that American dream. My dad's a high school graduate. My mom didn't even graduate high school. But because they were able to find their success through the franchise model, this is something that matters to me personally. And that's what frustrates me about this rule that Darren brought up, is that we have an administration that is so focused on governing through the regulatory environment because they have not been successful at building the coalitions electorally that they need to build within the constitutional responsibilities of the legislative branch, that we are now focused on fighting something that unelected bureaucrats who believe they have great ideas when they sit in concrete buildings in Washington, D.C., we fight their decisions. Now, remember, we have to have a regulatory environment, but it can't be overreaching to the fact that small business owners, who are the backbone of our economic growth, that as Darren addressed, we need to continue to monitor to grow more robustly, to be able to address some of the financial concerns and long-term fiscal situation in this country. But if we allow them to legislate and affect small businesses, then small businesses aren't going to continue to be that backbone. And that's you. You're the ones who make up the chambers of commerce. You're the ones who actually make up the job growth in this country. We've got to do things to take government out of your way rather than put it into your businesses, which is exactly what this administration is trying to do. The good news is, they're only going to be there for a few more months. Elections matter. That's what we need to continue to talk about in the legislative branch, no matter who is in charge, is that we need to fulfill our constitutional responsibilities to actually be a check and balance on any executive, Republican or Democrat, who actually puts this overreach forward like this administration's done.
I think the pipeline to our small businesses and our big businesses is unquestionably education. We saw that Every Student Succeeds Act passed, which is one of the first major reforms since 2002. Basically, it overhauls a lot of the No Child Left Behind. How do you guys see that affecting the schools here in McLean County, here in Bloomington, here in Nome?
Well, I was very proud to be a part of that bill, along with Congressman Davis, to really dismantle No Child Left Behind. And really, from a public policy standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, really what we realized in Congress is No Child Left Behind. Having the federal government in charge of education policy doesn't make sense. We have wonderful schools in McLean County here, but we have to remember we have elected local school boards, we have elected state reps and state senators that decide education policy. What we did in this bill is recognize that having a one-size-fits-all in Washington, D.C. with the Department of Education doesn't make sense. Letting local people make decisions here in McLean County on education policy, on how we should disperse funds, what we should do with education, makes a lot more sense. And at least it took us way too long to do that, but at least we recognize that. We passed a bill, a very bipartisan bill, by the way, in the House and in the Senate. Went to the President, they signed it. And really what it does is give relief to local school districts on how they make those decisions. The more we can have those decisions made here locally, the better it is for kids ultimately, and for our teachers and administrators. And so was proud to be a part of that bill. I think I continue to hear from educators as I travel around my district on the benefits of that. But I think it's a good example and a precedent to set moving forward. The less that we do in Washington, D.C., and the more we do locally with our local folks making decisions on education policy, the better.
Darren's right. It's about local control, and that's exactly what that bill that we supported allowed more for. It's putting decisions instead of in the hands of those same bureaucrats in concrete buildings in Washington, in the hands of your teachers, parents, school board members, administrators right here in Bloomington Normal. 16 years ago or 15 years ago when No Child Left Behind was passed, it was passed in an overwhelmingly bipartisan majority, just like this one. But as we saw it being implemented over the years, we needed to make changes. So much so, this was the single bill that I didn't meet anybody in my entire 2.5 years, 3 years in Washington that said, we don't need to change this. We don't need to fix this. I can't believe it took that long to fix, but we were able to accomplish that goal. But it doesn't mean this bill's going to be without faults. 10 years from now, we may need to make some more fixes. And that's why we need your help. We need to make sure that our educational systems are putting the best and the brightest into our universities, and those that aren't going to the universities, into the trades. And we need to make sure that they're learning at the grade levels that you expect as employers. So we need your help in monitoring the success or any failures with this bill and any other bill too. So keep in contact with us on that.
You know, the other side of that is our workforce, and I think, you know, both in McLean County and nationally, there's sort of a notion that there are jobs available, but there's, you know, it's hard to find people that have the hard skills and the soft skills. I mean, where do you see kind of the holes in legislation or funding that deals with workforce? How can we as a chamber help bring that attention to you? Go ahead.
Well, I mean, you guys are doing it by having events like this with Congressman LaHood and me to talk about what we're doing in Washington and the impact, you know, our solutions in Washington may have on what you do. But you're the ones that can tell us what needs to be fixed. And I represent Decatur, Illinois, ADM's main facility. And for many, many months, Macon County, Illinois, had the highest unemployment rate in the state. Well, a great idea, was turned into a reality by ADM and the local transportation interests in the community to create their intermodal facility. And seemingly overnight, they had jobs that couldn't be filled. They still have a hard time filling truck driving jobs that are in Decatur, that don't leave the community, that make upwards of $60,000 a year right out of the chute, because they can't get enough qualified drivers with CDLs that can pass other required tests to have that CDL. So jobs are available. We need to make sure that we get young people and those who are looking for new jobs the training they need, and that's where our community colleges come into play too, to be able to have the flexibility. And we actually reauthorized the WIA legislation authorization that's hopefully making it more flexible so that our community colleges can work with our local employers to be able to address training programs that are more relevant to the jobs that would become available in communities like Bloomington Normal. And that's our optimism. And again, we need your feedback if it's not working that way so that we can offer fixes too.
I would just add to that, one thing that was very apparent to me in going to Washington, D.C., when you get to see other states, what a wonderful community college network we have in Illinois, and how blessed we are to have that. And we take that for granted. I know Rob is here from Heartland, but I have 7 community colleges that touch my 19 counties in my district. And you look at the commitment and dedication of what community colleges have done for education in the state of Illinois, and we're really lucky to have the system in Illinois. And I know a lot of that's tied to state funding, but what they've done in terms of being very proactive in adapting to the local economy and helping kids that maybe don't fit into a traditional educational path, but to find ways how they can help in our local community with some of our trades and some of our other industries that we have, and adapting to that. But our community colleges play a vital role when it comes to that in terms of workforce development, and we need to continue to support them.
Something that's made large changes to a lot of our members would be the Affordable Care Act. I'm sure that you hear about that all the time. For example, we had one of our members send in for a small business under 50 employees who still believe that providing those benefits are important to retaining and bringing in and retaining quality employees. What option is there for them, especially with some of the premium hikes that go on that? I guess, what do you see for the future for the Affordable Care Act as well?
Well, I think we need to reform it. It needs to be changed. I mean, you look at what happened with Anthem and United Healthcare pulling out. And, I would start with the premise. I don't think the federal government runs big things well, and I think we're seeing that with the ACA and the Obamacare. When you're having the federal government involved to the extent they are here, look at all of the promises or things that were made at the time. Your premiums are going to go down. You're going to have more options. You're going to have more flexibility. Costs are going to go down. And none of those things have come to fruition in my district or Rodney's district. It's been just the opposite. And it leads to a lot of cynicism about government. And rightly so. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I run into that just talk about their cost of their premiums, the cost of health care, and less options. So what do we do about it? I mean, I think it's going to collapse under its own weight. I mean, that's the trajectory it is on right now when you look at what's happening. And, the thought when it was rolled out was you're going to have lots of different options. I was just reading an article yesterday. Now in many of the communities around the country, there's only one option because everybody is pulled out. So it's not working the way that it should. So what do we do about it? In our Better Way agenda, Paul Ryan has laid out what we would do if we were able to reform it and change it. But clearly, there are a number of things I think are positive to keep in there. Being able to keep your kids on your insurance till 25 or 26, not discriminating because pre-existing conditions. But putting those aside, we have to make this a more market-based, competitive system. Being able to go across state lines for insurance has to be a part of that. We have to bring the private sector back into this to help make this more competitive. And the other part of it is that as the premiums get raised, a lot of that is going to pay for people that don't make the best healthcare decisions. And so you're paying for people that are not doing what the Affordable Care Act said they were going to do for them. So it's frustrating, but we need to change it and reform it.
Darren's absolutely right. This has been an abysmal failure when you look at what the promises were made before we even got to Washington. Well, we're trying to fix a problem that we didn't help create. And when we talk about reforms, Darren helped me pass language that can directly benefit you as small businesses, especially you mentioned those businesses that are hovering right around the 50 employee limit. I have a veterans advisory board, and one of my vets on that advisory board early in my first term raised his hand at a meeting I had and said, why is it that veterans who get their health care through the VA or through TRICARE or if they're active duty, why do they count towards the employer's 50 employee limit that Obamacare sets? I said, I have no idea, Brad, but I'll go back and find out. Well, I sat down with our majority leader staff and gave him my idea, and I remember him looking at me going, wow, if we could exempt small businesses from the 50 employee limit if they hire more veterans, that's a win-win. It was the first bill that we passed this Congress. When I got sworn in on January 5th, I believe it was my birthday, I stood next to then Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Paul Ryan, and talked about this bill. The bill is now law. So to answer your question, what can we do to help those small businesses? Congressman LaHood and I have taken that advice and already put into existence laws that allow you to grow businesses. And go look at veterans. Go look at those veterans who aren't going to use your health care. And you can get over that 50 employee limit by hiring our heroes. And to me, that matters. And I wanted to say one more thing about the Affordable Care Act. The pre-existing issue is personal for me because my wife's a 17-year colon cancer survivor. Look, I want to make sure that no family has to worry about being turned down for coverage when it comes to fighting cancer. But we have to do a better job of actually allowing, as Darren said, the marketplace to put forth affordable coverage. Look, we are on Obamacare. By law, members of Congress are the only people in America that have to get their coverage through the Affordable Care Act. And I got a son, twin boys actually, who have kidney stone problems. So I had a 16-year-old visit the ED 4 different times a couple months ago. Let me tell you, the cost to use the Affordable Care Act insurance is unaffordable for many who aren't like Darren and me who get paid well. I can afford it. Other families can't. And we have the same problems in our hospitals and our emergency rooms where they're seeing more people and patients who have coverage, but they can't afford to pay the bills that are attached to that coverage. So we have that coverage that was promised, but you still have the same costs against the hospitals that are providing that care. That to me is wrong. It's a failure, and we're going to hopefully have somebody in the executive branch that's going to agree with us that it needs to be repealed and replaced. We put a repeal bill on the president's desk. Who in here thought he'd sign it? If you did, let me show you the Constitution. We need a change to be able to make this change, and that's what it's going to take.
Just a quick reminder: every table has pens and pads and paper on them. If you have any questions while we're going through, write them down, and Tracy and Jonathan will, if you want to just hold it up, they'll come around and grab them, and we'll get to those here in a few minutes.
Now we get to pick and choose whose cards you read. I'm looking around this room. I see a couple people. I don't want to write questions.
Something that's obviously getting a lot of kind of national attention as well as the TPP. Last week we had Mr. McConnell say that it was dead until the next president, and we had Ways and Means Kevin Brady say that it may be revived. What do you see for the future of the TPP in the 114th Congress or passed, and how does that affect McLean County? I think it's kind of a big idea that I think people don't necessarily realize how it will affect their everyday life.
TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. It was a trade agreement that's been negotiated over the last 5 years by the Obama administration that would set up a trading bloc with 11 other countries around the world, create the largest trading bloc in our history. So 9 countries from Southeast Asia and 2 from South America. And I've been pretty vocal on this issue. I mean, for my district, trade, if it's done the right way, fair and in a transparent way, equals more jobs and economic opportunities for Central and West Central Illinois. Whether it's Caterpillar tractors that are being made in East Peoria, Illinois, or it's our farmers producing, the best corn and soybeans, trade, if it's done the right way, equals economic opportunities. And so, even though this has been negotiated by President Obama and his USTR, I think it's good for America. Now, what happens with it? I think the rhetoric of the presidential race has really tainted this agreement on both sides, whether that's Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump. And I think really the arguments that are made or have been made, I think have been really disingenuous. Again, I think if trade's done the right way, it helps our community. I'll give you an example. About 20% of the corn and soybeans grown here in McLean County goes somewhere else around the world every year. Under the TPP, that'll go up about 5%, create about 5% more of a market to send those products around the world. Again, we got to remember, we represent 4% of the world's population here in America, 4%. So we have a market out there, 96%, where our products are going to go. We live in a global economy, so we have to have markets for our products to go to. So TPP provides that. Now, I was not in Congress when we did the TPA, Trans-Pacific Authority, to engage in this negotiation, but under the law, this trade agreement runs out at the end of the year, the end of the calendar year. So it will have to be renegotiated, which will be an awful lot of work. I'm still optimistic that after November 8th in the lame duck, we'll have an opportunity to vote on this, but a couple things have to happen. I don't think the president has done a good enough job selling this. He hasn't got enough Democrats on board in the House. We clearly have to do that. And there's going to have to be a will in the Congress to do that. And let me just mention one other thing about the TPP. The number one adversary against TPP is China. China doesn't want to see this go through because it's a threat to them. China wants to write the rules of trade. They want to create the market in Southeast Asia. They want to control trade. So they're working against this trade agreement. And we got to remember that. This will be good for America and create more opportunities for us, but we have to change some of the rhetoric that's out there that, I think is disingenuous, and talk about the benefits. I stood in Sangamon County with 20 farmers around me, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, and those farmers talked about what TPP means for them. We got to remember, I have the Illinois River and the Mississippi River. You look at the corn and soybeans that go on the barges every single day and go down to New Orleans, go through the new Panama Canal, and go all around the world. We create more trading opportunities. That's going to help America. But we have to, I think, do a better job in talking about that and have the president do a better job.
Oh, once again, Congressman LaHood is correct. Don't be used to me saying that. No, he's absolutely right. It's, the discussion on fair trade, I bring back to us. We're the ones who write the trade promotion laws. We're the ones who approve or disapprove of trade agreements. It's our responsibility as legislators to make sure that the structures in place allow for that fair trade and free trade. Congressman LaHood mentioned Caterpillar. I've got a facility in Decatur in my district that manufactures mining trucks. Are we doing much coal mining in this country anymore? Okay, so if my United Auto workers at that facility want to stay employed, where do we grow our market share? Overseas. And to do that, we have to have what? Trade. We have to be able to get those mining trucks out into the global marketplace. Otherwise, there's not going to be a market for them here. And that's a message that we send to those who are opposed to free trade on a regular basis. Look, I helped write some provisions in the TPA law that actually changed the adjudication process for the Department of Commerce. And what does that mean besides it's inside baseball and everybody wants to pick up their phones and go, he's going to be talking about something that we don't care about. But it means we actually can impact something like steel dumping that's been affecting this country for decades now. And what does that mean to manufacturers here in Bloomington and Normal? It means a more cost-effective, better steel product that's used in the manufacturing process that's domestically produced in places like Granite City, Illinois, the U.S. Steel plant. Because we had steel coming in from Russia, China, Korea, that was lower quality and dumped into the marketplace, under the current laws, until we change them, the Department of Commerce would have to wait a certain amount of time before those trade disagreements could be adjudicated. Well, that meant that all that steel was already out in the marketplace, and once it was ruled in our favor, the government got, sorry, and then they do it again. So Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker called me a few months ago to talk to me about TPP. And she said, well, what can we do? I said, well, what you can do is actually use the law that I helped write to enforce anti-steel dumping provisions. She's begun to do that. And U.S. Steel told me just 2 weeks ago, 3 cases have been brought forth under our new expedited adjudication process, and all 3 have been ruled in our favor, thus helping the domestic steel market be able to compete against that dumping and allowing manufacturers here to use that product. And I said, keep doing that, Madam Secretary. She said, what can we do to get TPP passed? I said, well, I think you're calling the wrong person. Why don't you call some of the folks on your side of the aisle and do a better job with the president convincing them that trade is important? Because the problems you're going to have passing this in the lame duck, and I'm not as optimistic as you, isn't going to come from our side as much as it is the other side. And that is where the focus needs to be, especially from this administration.
At the end of September, we saw the passage of the Water Resources Development Act, which Congressman Davis, you were very active in its passage, and it spent some time in the Department of Natural Resources, which Congressman LaHood sits on. I was wondering if you could speak on how that affects, the 18th Congressional District and the 13th Congressional District, and McLean County.
Huge. As Darren mentioned, we both serve areas along the Illinois and Mississippi rivers, and as our ag sector can tell you, we've got to have access to the global marketplace through our navigation system. Like, I used to be a congressional staffer for 16 years, and I worked on issues related to water navigation. It's a travesty that we have not seen our locks and dams upgraded along the Illinois and Mississippi rivers as planned 20 plus years ago. I mean, look, I sat in a hotel ballroom like this in Quincy, Illinois back in 1997-98 when the Corps of Engineers picked which plan they were going to follow to actually upgrade our facilities. Guess what's been done since then? Nothing. That is a failure, and things need to change. So I sit on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, which has jurisdiction over the Water Resources Development Act. It's an area I've been very proud of. When we passed the bill 2 years ago, we actually changed some of the institutional problems with the Corps of Engineers. I mean, right now, just going from an idea to design and engineering to get to even pouring concrete is an average of 15 years, an average. So we actually changed words on pieces of paper that now by law make them have to complete that in 3. And their heads about to explode. They don't know how to do that. 2 years later, we're now on track to renew our Water Resources Development Act, which is the way it should be every 2 years. And it hadn't happened before we passed the bill in 14 since 2007. And now we're making adjustments. I had an amendment that was accepted into this bill that will actually make the Corps think beyond its current limitations. And we're trying to figure out a way to allow for the Inland Waterway Trust Fund dollars that you pay when you ship your products to actually be implemented toward construction rather than just Corps of Engineers paperwork. That's something that I think we need to take a serious look at. The status quo is unacceptable. And anybody that defends it is defending the unacceptable and the institutional problems that we've seen in upgrading our water infrastructure that is so crucial to our districts. So as we move forward with this study, I want the Chamber to really take a look at it because I think it's a real innovative way to actually see movement on this infrastructure.
I was proud to support the Word Bill 2, a Water Resources Development Act, and Rodney serving on that committee has been there's no stronger advocate for this bill than Rodney on there, and a lot of our members go to Rodney on this issue, and it was long overdue. Infrastructure, transportation is the backbone of our districts, right? I mean, that's what gets commerce to where it needs to go, and having good infrastructure is vitally important. Whether it's our roads and bridges, whether it's our rail system, or whether it's our locks and dams, we have to have good infrastructure in place to get our commodities, our products. Again, I live on the Illinois River. The Mississippi River is my western border. You look at the commodities, the Caterpillar tractors, the ADM products that go up and down that river. Having good locks and dams, again, equals economic opportunities and benefits our district greatly, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industry. So this bill was long overdue, but it will have a real impact on getting projects done. I have arguably the most deteriorated lock and dam in Beardstown, Illinois, in Cass County. It's called the LaGrange Lock and Dam. It's the next one to be fixed, but we're just waiting for an accident or something to go wrong there if we don't get it fixed and updated. So this is, again, when we think about using taxpayer money to make investments, we want to make investments where it's going to pay dividends in the private sector. How is this going to help the private sector create more growth? This Ward bill does that, and our transportation bill that we passed last December, the FAST Act, does the same thing.
As you both know, agriculture plays a huge role in the economy of McLean County. Last July, the President signed into effect the GMO labeling law, which supersedes any individual state laws. How do you feel about the mandates in that, and how does that affect McLean County?
Well, I serve on the House Ag Committee, and the subcommittee that I chair actually has jurisdiction over the GMO debate. How many people here think GMOs are dangerous? Anyone? Thank you for not raising your hand. I would have had a debate with you. Science tells us 100% of the time that GMO products have been completely safe in every single scientific experiment. Unfortunately, hysteria has been allowed to overrule good policy. And because Vermont passed a law that would have begun being implemented July 1st to call for GMO labeling in one state, it had the potential to disrupt our entire food supply chain and grocery supply chain in this country. So, of course, what was the solution? Come to Congress to fix it. I'm always leery when people say come to Congress to fix anything, but especially something related to food supply. Now, we actually passed the bill out of the House that would have created a GMO labeling program similar to the organic program and that certification process that actually is very successful. So that every single consumer who may be concerned about this actually knows what GMO products are and if they're in their food. This got caught up in partisan politics, once again, to where we passed a watered-down version that I supported, but I was not extremely supportive of because I thought we were able to solve the problem in a very well-balanced, scientifically based approach with our bill. But it just goes to show you the power of one senator in the minority party in the U.S. Senate. Her name's Debbie Stabenow from Michigan. She ran out the clock, and we were forced to actually implement this new law, which I'm optimistic because Tom Vilsack at the USDA, I got to give him credit. He does a good job. He's a good guy. He understands the need and the impact that laws like this have on our agricultural sector right here in the Midwest. The USDA is tasked with drawing up rules to implement this bill. But here's my fear. My fear is that GMOs are going to be tagged as dangerous. Look, I don't know what MSG is, but because my soy sauce says no MSG, I think it's bad. When no one's ever told me if it is or not. Because the label tells me it is. If we don't have biotechnology, which is GMO technology, we are not going to be able to feed the 9 billion mouths that are going to populate this world in the next 20 years. Because we're not going to be able to farm more land to grow less yields that GMO products allow us to do in a safe way right now. That's the potential that we have going into the next 2 decades if we don't address the misinformation when it comes to genetically modified seeds. So that's our solution. We'll see how the USDA implements it. I was proud to be one of the leaders on this issue and stand on the floor and debate it. But you have to break through the hysteria that's out there on the web and within certain communities to be able to see the truth when it comes to GMOs.
I would just add, on just one observation about agriculture. I remind our friends from Chicago all the time, ag is the #1 industry in Illinois. The #1 industry in Illinois. We have a very diversified economy in Illinois, but ag is the #1 industry. It's the #1 industry in our districts. Of the 435 congressional districts, I have the 9th largest in terms of corn and soybean production. Last year, McLean County, of the 102 counties, had the highest yields of any of the counties in the entire state. Ag is important to our districts, and having a robust ag economy and supporting ag is what we have to continue to fight. But the GMO bill is an example of people that don't understand agriculture or people that have their own view on things. There are less and less members of Congress that come from rural areas. Less and less members of Congress that represent ag. And so, it's imperative on Rodney and I that we continue to fight for agriculture because we're losing those kind of members that come from ag districts in rural districts. And what happens in rural America in agriculture is vitally important. I have an ag advisory committee. I have 2 farmers from every one of my counties, and I meet with them quarterly. Actually, Rodney and I just had a joint meeting with our 2 ag committees. But what I love is meeting young farmers and people that are engaged in technology. There are so many of our farmers out there. People just, it's amazing when you go out and see what farmers are doing and being creative, being innovative, and working to help make their farms better, more productive, more efficient, and working on new technologies and what they're constantly doing to modernize the farms. And there's a lot of them in Illinois. We're on the cutting edge of many of these technologies that farmers are using every day here in McLean County and all over Illinois. We have to support ag and understand that there's people that don't understand it. And as we head into the Farm Bill in 2018, we got to be even more on guard and educate people on the importance of agriculture. And again, getting government out of the way so that farmers can do what they do best. They're the best stewards of the land. Let them do what they do best.
We're going to we got a little bit of time left. I think we're going to try to turn over some of the questions from the audience. Something we talked about this morning was the Every Student Succeeds Act and giving more power locally to states and local officials to decide education reform. The question is, why can't we have local state dictated labor reform?
Labor reform?
Yes, that comes from Kyle Myers. Would you like to?
Question: BNHLA, the Hotel Lodging Association. With the Hotel Lodging Association, our biggest concern right now is the labor reform with the overtime rules and all that. Why is that getting mandated federally as a blanket statement as opposed to local and state having some decision in that?
Well, I mean, it's kind of what we talked about at the beginning. It's part of what the problem is that we have, again, a federal, Department of Labor that thinks they know best for, the entire country. And I think part of this is kind of a legacy issue for the Obama administration and what they want to do. I will tell you, there has been a lawsuit filed by 22 states in federal court in Sherman, Texas. I actually filed an amicus brief on this to put an injunction in place to stop the overtime rule from going in place, right? To basically say we need to have a one-year injunction to stop this because of the drastic effect it's going to have on businesses like yours and many other in this room, nonprofits, colleges, small and medium-sized businesses. And part of the legal argument on that is, from a constitutional standpoint, is this is a violation of the separation of powers. Legislation, what this executive rule will have, the impact it will have, should have been brought to the legislature so elected people could be accountable for passing a law on this. Now the fact is they could have never passed it through Congress because it doesn't make sense, right? It's gonna hurt people, and so we're caught up in this. Now, if that injunction does not get granted between now and then, this is going to go into effect on December 1st, and everybody's going to be subject to it. And that's going to be a tough thing to adapt to. I've talked to 3 different people this week about whether they should start making the necessary, decisions that they have to make to do that. But to your question, are they able to do this? This court case is going to help decide that, but clearly this is a decision that they think they know best. Again, in Washington, D.C., the Department of Labor on what overtime rules should be.
This is why we're trying to fight this so extensively out in Washington. Darren and I are helping to lead that charge. But as small businesses, I believe your payroll companies that you make contract with are already preparing for this. You need to ask them what the impact could be so that you get real data that you can then go back to your policymakers with, especially those who are supportive of this, like maybe a senator in the state. He needs to know the impact.
Another question we have is, can you talk about the opioids bill Congress recently passed and how it could help workforce shortage issues in the long term? For those unfamiliar, that's the Carroll legislation. I think a lot of people were very happy to see that pass.
Yeah, bipartisan bill that addressed the opioid and heroin really epidemic in this country. I spent 10 years as a state and federal prosecutor. I prosecuted a lot of drug cases, so I saw that side of it. But I have been amazed at how this issue transcends everything in our society. It transcends socioeconomic boundaries, transcends rural and urban, transcends racial boundaries. The addictive nature of opioids that we have now and the trajectory that it leads to heroin. I had a series of roundtable discussions in my district back in the spring, one in Springfield, one in Quincy, and one in Peoria, Bloomington, Normal. And the amount of people that came forward that had family members affected by opioid abuse and then leading to heroin, it's absolutely amazing. This epidemic is an epidemic. In some ways, I analogize this to what drunk driving was 20 years ago. We had a real significant problem, so what did we do? We raised awareness, we changed the law, we got funding in the right place, we brought that down. This is a preventable epidemic. It absolutely is. So the bill that Rodney and I worked on and passed in a bipartisan way addresses this issue. It's about $560 million. The president wanted more than that, and I think this is a good start, but it does 4 things. First of all, it gets Narcan into our first responders and our police cars. Narcan reverses the effect of an overdose, saves people's lives. So that's the first thing it does. There's many police departments that have it and others that don't. Second is, it used to be heroin came from Southeast Asia. Now it comes from Mexico and Central America. So money to go to law enforcement to stop the drugs from coming across the border and to go after the dealers that are bringing it to Central and West Central Illinois. The third part is rehabilitation. You talk to our folks that work in rehabilitation, work in the drug courts, people that work every day with addicts, they need more resources. They need more beds. They need more money. The drug court in Springfield, 85% of the people in the drug court are heroin or opioid addicted people. This is a this addictive nature of opioids has to change. The fourth part about the bill, which I think is also very relevant, reining in doctors that overprescribe opioids. We all have a family member or a friend that went in for a knee surgery, ankle surgery, hip, and you come out with a big bottle of pills, of Vicodin or Percocet. The overprescribing of doctors. How do we rein in doctors and hold them accountable? This bill does that. Holds them accountable from the standpoint of a regulatory standpoint in looking at their license and holding people accountable. That has to change. If you've ever been in a hospital, when you see that big smiley faces that nurses have to implement, put a smile on whoever's in that bed by giving them overprescribing of opioids. So these are 4 things that address this bill. It's a start in the right direction in bringing down this epidemic. Again, bipartisan bill. It's one of the best things we've done in Congress in the 1 year that I've been there.
You guys right here in McLean County are on the front lines of this epidemic. The first time I've ever seen heroin in my life was at the evidence locker at the sheriff's office just a few months ago. I was there with Kathy Davis, your coroner, and Sheriff Sandage, and they talked to me about the impact that opioids are having on your community. And it's forcing costs that then have to be burdened by local taxpayers, each and every one of you. Who would have thought that when we've tried to address some of the doctors' overprescribing issues in the past, that reducing access to prescription drugs would lead to